we're in the manufacturing space, so we need to be, how do we attract people to these new exciting opportunities? How do we invest money to really steer people towards the trades and the opportunities so they maybe want to go to a vocational school to learn how to become a plumber or learn how to become an electrician.
Great. Those are great jobs. Yeah, they do super well, right? I mean,
and they use our tools.
They do use your tools. That helps too. Just a quick reminder to check us out and follow us on LinkedIn so you're up to date on all our episode releases. Hey, it's Ari. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Made in America podcast. I'm really excited today. We have Don Allan, president and CFO of a very well-known Connecticut company, Stanley Black & Decker. Don, thank you so much for coming on today.
It's great to be here, Ari. I really appreciate being invited and look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, man, me too. Well, it's the Made in America podcast, Don. So we asked the same two questions to start. What do you make and why do you make it?
Well, Stanley Black & Decker, I think most people realize that we make construction tools and certain mechanics tools as well, and other industrial tools. So our construction tools are things such as power tools under the DeWALT brands, the Black & Decker brands. We obviously have CRAFTSMAN now, so we acquired CRAFTSMAN, that brand, about 3.5 years ago, which is an iconic American brand that we're so proud to have in the Stanley Black & Decker family. And of course, we have the Stanley brand. And we also are a company that has some other businesses that a lot of people don't know about. We call them our industrial segment and our security segment. The industrial segment is a combination of different types of industrial tools. So large attachments used on big pieces of equipment as an example. So a bucket that might scoop a big mound of dirt out to create a hole and eventually maybe bury a pipe in a town construction project. We also have our security business, which is we provide electronic security services to a large commercial building, like an office building or a retail center or a restaurant. And so we'll install the alarm system, we'll service it, and we'll monitor it. And so those are two businesses that maybe a lot of people don't know about, and they both are very heavily weighted to the U.S. market.
It's a lot going on in a classic Connecticut company. We'll get into some of that. What's the why behind Stanley? Like, what's the mission? What's the purpose?
Well, our purpose as a company is for those who make the world, because we really believe that we're providing products and solutions that help people create new things, whether that's building a new home, whether that's building a large commercial building, whether that's providing a security solution to an existing building, whether it's helping an auto manufacturer build a car, because we have fasteners and fastening machines that are used in basically the construction of the car in the manufacturing process. So we're providing the tools, the products, the solutions that really create all the things that you see in the world. So we are for those who make the world.
That's pretty cool, right? Yeah, it must be fun to work and do that every single day.
Yeah, it is.
So let's talk a little bit about the personal why before we get into more of Stanley, the company, touch a little bit on the history. And certainly a lot of people, I think, know about the manufactory and sort of the future of Industry 4.0, the big bet that Stanley's made there. Love to talk a little bit about the acquisition growth and how the strategy of the company's maybe changed in the last 20, 25 years from what it had been previously. So there's a lot of wood to chop there. But before we get in there, I think the audience may like to hear a little bit about you, Don. I mean, you're a Connecticut guy, went to University of Hartford. Maybe tell us a little bit about your journey into manufacturing. Why did you pick manufacturing? How have you found it? Maybe give us a little bit of that kind of intro beginning.
Sure, yeah. I was born in Hartford, Connecticut, Hartford Hospital. I was raised in Windsor, Connecticut, pretty much my entire life until I went to college, and I moved to towns like Wethersfield and Rocky Hill. So I've kind of been around the Hartford area for my entire life. And so I'm really tied to this area from a lot of perspectives. One, I enjoy the people here. I think Connecticut has a wonderful variety of people that really believe passionately in the community. I believe in really being a force that's positive in the community and try to get involved in as many nonprofit organizations as possible. My family is a New England family, so we're mostly Massachusetts and Connecticut-based individuals. We love New England. except for January and February. The rest of the other 10 months, we think it's a beautiful place to be, and we really enjoy it. And I think it's a coincidence that I went to the University of Hartford. I was actually looking at going to URI, and I made a pivot at the last minute to say, no, I want to go to the University of Hartford because I wanted to be close to my family for some personal reasons. Mm-hmm. And it was a great decision because I love the school. I love the connection it has to the Hartford community. And I just got a wonderful education there and had a fantastic experience. So much that I have gotten myself back involved in the university the last 15 plus years. So now I'm on the Board of Regents. I'm involved in the Barney School of Business as well. And occasionally I show up as a random teacher or professor.
Adjunct professor.
As well. And when I started my career coming out of the University of Hartford, I was a CPA. So I had an accounting degree. And I went to work for Ernst & Young here at the Hartford office. And I didn't really know what industry I wanted to get into. So I actually started out doing audits of financial services companies or banks. Mm-hmm. And although I found that interesting, it really didn't go to any passion I had. But it did give me some education on that industry. And from a finance person, it was important to get that kind of knowledge. Mm-hmm. But after about 4 years in my career, I started, one of the partners at Ernst & Young said, hey, you really should start auditing, some manufacturing companies, some industrials. Because it'll give you a better sense of how businesses are run and how things are created, mm-hmm. and how innovation exists in a company and how it thrives. And I went, okay, sure. And oddly enough, the first audit client I got put on in Hartford was Stanley.
Really?
Stanley Works. So I audited that company for 2 or 3 years back then. And I just fell in love with the whole manufacturing industry because you really feel like you're creating something. Yeah. And you're providing a product to an end user or a customer that sees it as valuable. Mm-hmm. And then you see how the innovation comes to life in a company like Stanley and Stanley Black & Decker, where there's hundreds and thousands of people that are working on what's the new functionality, what's the new breakthrough innovation that's going to come to the market that's going to make our users' lives more productive, more effective, more efficient, in our case, on the job site. Mm-hmm. And so I just really kind of fell for it at that point. I left Ernst & Young and I actually went to a Hartford company called Loctite, mm-hmm. which manufactured adhesives and other chemicals along those lines. It was a great company from a global perspective because actually 80% of the company was outside the U.S. So I had an experience for 3 or 4 years there, which really helped me understand emerging markets, the European markets. But it lacked a little something in the manufacturing sense. Although they were a manufacturer, making super glue and making adhesives is not exactly the same as what we do at Stanley Black & Decker. Mm-hmm. So I got one of these random phone calls from someone I knew through my Ernst & Young days and said, hey, Stanley is looking for a new corporate controller. Would you be interested in talking to them about that? So I went out there. Within 4 days, they'd made me an offer. Within 2 weeks, I was already working. And that was almost 22 years ago. And I've been there ever since, and it's just been a wonderful journey.
Love at first sight and a marriage that's lasted.
Exactly.
Not a bad place to be. So what's the journey like from controller of, at the time, was it still just Stanley Works
just
when
Stanley
you started?
Works, yeah.
So what was the journey like to go from Stanley Works as a controller to the CFO and president of Stanley Black & Decker? I mean, clearly there's probably a lot in there, so I don't know how we're going to kind of, buckle that all down. But maybe just sort of share that journey a little bit and what you thought about how you grew your career and how you added value to the business.
Yeah, when I went to Stanley, it was about a $2 billion in revenue company. And it was a combination of construction hand tools under the Stanley brand and a residential door business and an automatic door business. And that was really it. The residential door business was a business that it really struggled, and eventually we did sell that business.
Literally just doors to a house.
Literally like a front door.
Yeah. Got it.
It became a very commoditized product. It was hard to differentiate yourself with
course.
that. So when we first came there, the company needed a lot of kind kind of foundational work, fix-up work. It had been struggling for like the previous decade. It went through this amazing period of time in the 70s and even part of the early 80s where it kind of rode that DIY wave and the excitement of do it yourself and do projects at home. And Stanley had all these great jingles that were in that time period that everybody, remembers. But then it kind of just flattened out. It didn't really know where to go next. And there was like 3 or 4 of us that came in 99 to the company. And my first kind of mission was to really fix the finance organization, the processes, and then help our CFO at the time, who's now our CEO, Jim Laree, with where do we go with the strategy of the company. And
did you feel like it was sort of, and this is something I think maybe a lot of people can relate to, that it sort of had maybe a strategy, and like you mentioned, the 70s and 80s, riding this DIY wave, and sort of never figured out, okay, well, you can't stay the same strategy forever, and no new strategy, so it was sort of just aimlessly moving around, and you guys thought, hey, we got to pick a direction and get everyone kind of moving towards a target?
Exactly right. It had lost its way, and there's a lot of reasons for that, and no one really to be criticized for it. It just happened.
Happens. Yeah, we've all been there.
And so we started thinking about the strategy and where do we go with this business going forward, and we looked at it from a couple perspectives. One, what are we really good at? Well, we have a great brand at the time. It was just one brand. We had a great brand. We had a great innovation track record, and we were a world-class manufacturer. So we had 3 really
pretty good pillars to build on. Those aren't bad. Yeah.
How do you build on those 3 pillars going forward? And so we started with the brand and the innovation piece, and saying, okay, well, we can build out some different platforms. We have an automatic door business, which most people know when you walk in.
Yeah.
CVS or a Walgreens, that front door is a Stanley door.
I don't know if everyone knows that, but if you look at the operator, there's always labeled Stanley. It's like going in elevators and seeing Otis, right? Sometimes it fades in the background, but if you look around, you'll see it. Yeah.
But 90% of the door you go through is a Stanley door here in the United States. So how do we build on that? And then how do we build on our tool business? And clearly our door business was something we were going to exit. So we built a commercial security, electronic security business from our door business. So that whole business I described around providing electronic security solutions to large commercial buildings. We built that platform from our automatic door business. And it was like, okay, we're centered around the entrance of a building, a commercial building, but what other services can we provide to that commercial building? And so we ended up building a business that's, at the time, it was maybe $100 million in revenue to $150 million. Today, it's about $2.5 billion. And so through acquisitions and organic growth, we built out a major platform that's actually global, where it was primarily the U.S.
So when you guys thought about doing that, was it sort of looking at our strengths and saying, what are the different ways we can build on those strengths? And one of the ways that people often think about is sort of like land and expand, right? Like if I've got one thing, what can I expand ancillary? So is that sort of the strategy, saying, hey, we've got the door business. We can go to the people that have the doors and say, you probably need to lock these doors. You may want to have security to unlock the doors. Yeah. You may want to have security cameras to monitor what's going on. Yeah. So a logical extension. I mean, was it that well sort of thought out to?
It was, because you're dealing with the same individual or individuals at the company that you deal with in the door. So
same buying decision.
Same buying decision for the most part. Occasionally you had to bring in an IT person because there was some technology related to the electronic security. But for the most part, it was the same individual. So it was an extension of things we could offer that customer. And it's been very successful. The one thing that it lacked, if you think about those 3 things, that it wasn't really a manufacturer. The automatic door is a manufacturer.
Right.
But the other services were not. We were buying it from other manufacturers and providing those solutions. So that one, we're like, we like it's got 2 of the 3 traits, but it didn't have the 3rd trait.
Right.
Which and we've been pretty vocal about this publicly about our security business. It probably isn't a business that'll stay in our portfolio for the long term.
Because it's more of because when you think about the characteristics of the business, it's more of a like long-term service business than it is a manufacturing business.
Exactly.
Is that the rationale?
And it's slowly becoming commoditized over time because there's more and more people coming into that market. It's also it's a business that's going to require a lot of technology investment going forward for it to be successful. And maybe we're not the best company to do that when it's only 10, 15% of our company.
Right.
It's getting smaller and smaller because the tools part of our company continues to grow. And so then on the other side of the company back then, the tools side, we're like, how do we turn this into the tools company of the world? And it was that simple. It wasn't any more complicated than that. It was like, oh, how do we make this the number one tools company in the world? Because you had Black & Decker back then, which was a separate company. You had a company called TTI, which had various brands, and eventually they bought the Milwaukee brand that most people see here in the U.S. You had a German company, Bosch. You had some Japanese companies that were in power tools as well, like Makita and Hitachi. And then you had all kinds of different hand tool companies out there under different names. Danaher owned some hand tools. Cooper Industries owned some hand tools. And so there was a lot of fragmentation.
Sears and Craftsman was out there.
Sears obviously owned Craftsman.
Yeah.
There was a lot of fragmentation in the space. And so we said, there has to be a consolidation opportunity to really create the best tool company in the world. And so we went on that journey, and we did a lot of different acquisitions. And the biggest one we did for tools, obviously, was putting Stanley and Black & Decker together.
Huge. Which
took us from a company that was individually there about $4 billion in revenue, put them together, made an $8 billion revenue company. This year we're going to be probably $17.5 billion as a company. We're going to be over $20 billion next year because of some acquisitions we just closed on in the outdoor product space. So the framework of our company has changed a lot in those 22 years. So now you look at it and you say, okay, I got security at $2.5 billion. I got those industrial businesses at about $2 billion. And then I got the tools and outdoor businesses, which are together starting to approach, $17, $18 billion with these new acquisitions we announced. We announced one today, one called MTD, which are outdoor products that trade under the Cub Cadet and Troy-Bilt brand names. So we really have a powerhouse. We have the number one tool company in the world.
Yep.
And we're now building an outdoor product platform that'll be $4 billion in revenue next year that has the same aspiration of how do you create the number one outdoor product tool business in the world.
When you guys think about putting these big brand names together, and you've maintained them, right? So DeWalt's out there, Craftsman's still out there, Black & Decker, Stanley, right? So, how do you think about putting those things together so that, I guess, twofold. Number one, you're trying to obviously retain some of that brand equity that you bought, so you're keeping that out there. But then it seems like you sort of end up with some competition internally. So how do you sort of thread that needle?
Yeah, it's a great question, but actually the brands fit really well together. So DeWalt is the premium brand. So the high-end, high functionality, the professional construction worker wants DeWalt. And because it provides the type of solution to them that makes their job more productive. It produces less vibration as they're using the tool, so that's less wear and tear on their bodies throughout the day. Because a professional construction worker, I don't know if you've ever done that type of job, but when I was in college, I did it one summer, and doing that type of work for 10 or 12 hours a day is pretty intense. Yeah, because you're using these tools that are vibrating the whole time. And when you first start doing it, you actually go home at night and your hands are shaking a little bit because you're not used to that. So it's an intense job. So anything you can do to help with reduce the wear and tear on a construction worker, but also make them more efficient, is incredibly important. And so when we think about that, it's an important part of the strategy of this particular business.
Yeah, and so then also thinking about innovation, right? So the innovation that you might need, to your point, for like a home user hand tool, or if I'm buying a drill for the house, I hang a few pictures, maybe fix a door here and there. Yeah. So my need to have a constantly high performing, low vibration tool is different, to your point, than somebody who's working construction. You
can have a Black & Decker tool,
right? Right. So how do you guys think about managing that innovation component? Because you need like slightly different innovations, right? Because an innovation for a DeWalt package, it doesn't really maybe add value to me, but the DeWalt user isn't going to live with the Black & Decker drill, right? For the reasons we discussed. So how do you guys think about continuing to innovate as it gets a little bit more complex with having the different brand
so I think the DeWalt's that premium brand kind of on the top.
Right.
Then underneath that you have Craftsman and Stanley. And Craftsman goes across power tools and mechanics tools, and Stanley goes more into hand construction tools. And those three brands are at price points that are a little bit lower than what you would see in a DeWALT branded product. Then you have the Black & Decker brand, which is kind of a notch down from those two brands, that's really more towards the consumer. So if you just want to do what you said, put up a shelf,
Yep.
you know, you can buy a Black & Decker tool, you use it twice a year, it works perfectly. The brands in the middle, though, really play to something what we call the tradesman. And there's also the kind of intense DIYers that are in there too, the people that come every weekend, they're doing some project.
They got a little wood shop in their basement
they're just
or
like
whatever.
always doing something. You know, Craftsman and Stanley really play well to that. And so that tradesman category and those kind of high-end do-it-yourselfers love those brands. And you can get your power tools, you can get your mechanics tools, you can get your construction hand tools, tape measures, et cetera, all those different things with those different brands. They're at different price points, and they don't really compete against each other, which is interesting because that was one of the things that we first thought about as we were doing these acquisitions. Are we going to cannibalize existing business that we have today by bringing in, and Craftsman was the one we had the most concern about. We're bringing in, is that going to really dramatically change the landscape of Black & Decker or Stanley? And it didn't. It actually fit in like a hand in glove almost in that strategy because of what I just described.
So it ended up working out kind of perfectly.
It did.
How did when you looked at the manufacturing operations, right? I mean, you had some experience from Loctite, kind of going global. I imagine the footprint of operations and manufacturing is much bigger now than it was when you started.
Yeah.
You know, how do you guys think about managing that component and supply chain disruption? Some of the stuff we're seeing now. How's that worked out for you guys?
Yeah, so Stanley and Black & Decker went through in the kind of late 70s, early 80s, the whole migration of moving manufacturing to Asia. Low-cost country, get the lowest price possible, and then ship it all back into the United States and into the European markets. That trend has changed a lot in the last decade. And you really need to be much closer to your customers and your end users for a lot of different reasons. What we found out recently is the complexity of the supply chain. You know, hopefully we're not always going through a pandemic for the rest of our life, but you know, in a pandemic, in this situation, the complexity of the supply chain, of having a long supply chain, is not good.
Yeah.
And so we've gone from a situation now where we bring in certain things from Asia that used to take 30 to 40 days to get from one shore to the other. Now it takes almost 90.
Oh, wow.
And so you're tripling the cost, you're tripling the time, you're tripling the amount of inventory you need because you have to have things on water and in your warehouses. And it's just proved the point of the strategy that we've been executing on for the last 10 years, which is basically bringing back all the manufacturing to the United States or to Europe to serve the European market. And the good news is the timing of that is happening almost perfectly with what's happening in the fourth revolution of manufacturing, or what everyone calls Industry 4.0, with all the technology and the automation. You know, you are going to have a higher labor cost here than you would in Asia. That's okay, though. You just have to figure out how to manufacture differently here. And what's interesting is when we were first embarking on this strategy, everyone was worried about, we're going to displace a bunch of workers, you know, here in the U.S. How are we going to integrate Industry 4.0 and not have people lose jobs? We need to retrain them. And that is true to some extent, but what we're finding is that there's such a need for people/workers in the United States and in Europe that there's not enough people to do the work. So as you're bringing more and more back, you actually have to highly automate things. You have to highly digitize things because you just won't have enough people to do the work if you do it the way that you do it in Asia today.
Right. So the challenge that we were anticipating in terms of how are people going to embrace the technology without fear, which, you know, people have talked about in the past, right? When way back thinking about bringing in automated machines in the 90s and stuff, people are going to be displaced. Not really much of a challenge as it turns out.
No, it's not. But we do need to really make this field attractive to people.
Right.
We want them to say, oh, wow, going to manufacturing is cool. This is really, it's not the old manufacturing job where you were standing on a manufacturing line and You might be assembling a component or hitting
Pushing
a
a
button or
button.
two, and then you're handing it off to the next person in the assembly line. It's totally different now because it is highly automated. What you're doing is you're looking at data and information that's coming off the machinery, and you have to react to it. You have to respond to it. It's a really attractive opportunity for people that you can attract people that have kind of analytics backgrounds, digital backgrounds. You can train people who are interested in that. And, as a result, we've really been trying to invest a fair amount of money in this space because you also need to attract more people to the trades.
Right.
The vocational schools and the vocational jobs have become less of a focus here in the United States because there's so many other opportunities out there, and the money they can obtain in those opportunities continues to go up, which is a good thing. We have a wealth gap in this country. We need to continue to shrink that wealth gap, and the more competition you have for people ultimately is really going to drive that up and shrink that gap. So, but we have to be competitive. We're in the manufacturing space, so we need to be, how do we attract people to these new exciting opportunities? How do we invest money to really steer people towards the trades and the opportunities so they maybe want to go to a vocational school to learn how to become a plumber or learn how to become an electrician.
Great. Those are great jobs. Yeah, they do super well, right? I mean,
and they use our tools.
They do use your tools. That helps too. Why is Stanley, maybe this kind of dovetails into, why did Stanley decide to build the manufactory at all? Like, why has Stanley taken such a big interest in leadership in sort of Industry 4.0? And I'll just give a quick small plug. If anyone hasn't been down there, you guys used to offer up tours if people called up, so I think you still do that. It's really cool to sort of see what's possible from, virtual reality or augmented reality training, robots. I mean, really showing how things actually work in a lab environment that's not just theoretical, but shows the practical application. I mean, it's a big investment. It costs money to build. It costs money to staff. You guys seem really committed to it. Maybe talk through how you got to that strategy, why it's so important to spend the money to do that, to create this lab environment and bring other people into it.
Yeah, so about 4, maybe 5 years ago, we started talking about this fourth revolution that was emerging. But we also realized there weren't a lot of companies that were embracing it in a significant way. What most companies were doing as far as industrial manufacturers, they were doing these kind of lighthouse pilot locations. And so they'd go to one plant and they might apply a lot of the technologies to that one plant, or they might even just do a portion of the plant and really kind of prove out the concept, demonstrate that it works, that it drives ongoing productivity in the plant. It helps with some of the labor challenges, et cetera. But no company was really saying, I'm going to attack this with a lot of passion and really figure out how to drive it robustly across the entire landscape of our manufacturing operations. And trust me, I did a lot of searching trying to find companies and they just weren't there. So myself and Jim, our CEO, said, well, why don't we do it? Why don't we be the leaders in this space? And why don't we hire an Industry 4.0 leader? And in our case, that's Sudhi Bangalore, who we brought in about 3.5, 4 years ago at this point in time, and have him build a team that will do a couple things. One, it'll build kind of this showcase manufactory to show people what could be done. And initially the thought was bringing people from our own company and just show people in our own company that we can actually do this.
Right.
And so we created these different solutions that show the automation and the digitization of a manufacturing process and how efficient and effective it can be by utilizing those types of investments and technologies. So we now have about 150 people on the Industry 4.0 team. Their primary focus now is still education, but even more working with our plants to implement the technologies and help them ramp up those solutions and work out the bugs and ultimately use them to drive efficiency and effectiveness in their plant. Because one of the things that we found with the manufacturing teams initially, it's not so much a challenge now, was that they were very skeptical about this from a couple perspectives. One, it was a radical change.
Yeah.
Two, it was like, okay, does this mean I'm going to have to like fire half my team because I don't need them anymore? And three, they just were trying to do their jobs day to day.
Yeah, it's hard to. It's a huge change, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, change. Yeah.
So what we had to do is build some examples in various plants of how this can really work. And so what we've done is we created a fully automated power tool assembly line in our Charlotte, North Carolina facility. And so there's people around it that actually monitor the data. They take out cells when we have to change the type of product that we're going to assemble at that point in time. But, we've proven out that concept in the last 30 to 60 days, and now we're expanding it across that location and going to begin to move it to 2 other major power tool assembly locations as well. The digitization side is another example where we actually went into plants with software solutions and we connected sensors to the existing manufacturing equipment,
right,
to extract data off it. And so then we provided iPads to the folks on the shop floor, and so they didn't know, what do I do with this? This is like all this data is coming off. Like,
right.
What am I supposed to do with this? This is interesting, but so we had to train them on, well, what is the data telling you? And so an example would be eventually, like today, you can actually see a trend in the data that says that piece of equipment will fail in the next 6 hours if you don't
do this or that. So, so you're a finance guy. So how did you think about that investment? Because it seems like, you put a lot into it to then, kind of plant the seeds to reap the harvest a while later. How did you think about and rationalize the investment and then the return on the investment?
Yeah, that's a great question. Back in that time frame, before we hired Sudi, or right around the time we hired Sudi, I brought in McKinsey for like a short engagement. I said, prove out the business case of Industry 4.0 for Stanley Black & Decker. And I told them what I wanted to do. I had them work with Sudi and a few other folks. And they came back with what I would call like an eye-popping opportunity, which is, you can drive revenue of this amount, you can save this amount of money, and it added up to billions and billions of dollars. I didn't believe the numbers were that real. It couldn't be that big. So I said, but the opportunity has to be significant. And what was interesting is we finished out the business case. We found that if we did an investment of the Industry 4.0 team, which right now that cost is $20-30 million per year, so it's significant. Mm-hmm. Then there's the technology investments you have to make to bring in robots and automation and other software solutions. So we probably invest $20-30 million per year in that type of investment. But we're now generating somewhere between $125 to $150 million of annual savings from those investments. And we see a runway of that pace of savings for probably the next 5 to 7 years.
Without having to substantially continue to reinvest
we'll have to reinvest more, but not at that pace.
Not at the pace that you're at right now. And what about the cost? How did you think about the cost of, because you talked about before that there's training component. Mm-hmm. There's maybe some, I don't know, so I may be asking the question, but there may be some sort of like interruption to productivity while the change is being implemented. Like, did that happen at all? Or
a little bit. You had to kind of work through some of the transition bumps where you have downtime and you have things like that you have to work through. But through proper planning and doing it at the right time, we were able to navigate through that fairly effectively. So it didn't turn out to be a big hurdle. And we did dedicate resources in that Industry 4.0 team that was just dedicated to training and retraining. So
that was exactly what I was.
Their job to really go out and work with the team to help them navigate through that as we make these changes.
And how did you find that? Because I think that's a topic that I hear talked about a lot, and I've engaged in a number of conversations. Is sort of the upskilling, reskilling. I know people sort of call it different stuff, but it seems to me that to operate a fully automated line or to use the data instead of wait until it breaks or guessing, or I don't know what people do otherwise. There's to get the value, people need to know how to use it, and it's different than what they've been doing. Does that team from the manufacturer do all of that, and they're out there sort of training people? And have you found after the initial, of course, everyone's always most people are resistant or hesitant to change for any number of reasons. So once you break through that, do you find that they embrace it and they can really leverage it? Sounds like, I guess you have, based on the results.
Yeah, I would say that 80 to 90% of the people that we try to train/retrain embrace it and love it. There's always going to be a small percentage that say, yeah, I really don't want to do this.
Right.
And maybe we can redeploy into a different job in the plant, or maybe they decide to leave. But that's a small portion of it. What was interesting, one of the things that we did at the beginning that was really interesting, we did this in our Jackson, Tennessee plant, was we trained two kind of high potential younger folks that were in their 20s on the technology and the solutions. And we said, now you're going to be the trainer of the other people in the plant. So
train the trainer opportunity.
Train the trainer type of application. And so these individuals would be side by side with someone who's maybe in their 50s, who'd been working in our plant for 30 years, doing a job that had nothing to do with an iPad and no technology to it. And they helped them through that transition by training them as the trainer. But it was also what we found, we didn't really expect it. They bonded a lot more than we would have guessed, because you would have thought there might have been a little bit of pushback with the older generation, and not going to do that junk. But they actually, as they started to realize, well, you mean I don't have to do that job anymore? Because maybe they didn't really like that
doing
job.
it? Yeah, of course.
I can actually do this instead. It became more appealing to them that, okay, all that dirty stuff and manual things, it's now being automated, and now I get to do this. I get to monitor data and make a decision as to what I have to do in response to the data. It actually was easier than I would have guessed to turn it. It really was.
Yeah, listen, I mean, I'm a technology guy, so maybe it just sort of comes naturally to me. But I think if anyone just takes a step back and looks at technology in general, almost every advancement has more of the doing less of what you didn't like than what you don't like, right? I mean, who longs for the days of the typewriter? I mean, whiteout. Right. I mean, it was just nonsensical, right? Compared to word processing. I mean, spreadsheets versus handwritten tables. I mean, it just goes. The list is goes on and on. I always laugh when we watch older movies, and I have young kids, and we see a picture on the TV. Someone's holding a phone that's attached to the wall. My daughter just asked me a few months ago, "What is that?" Right? She's never seen a phone attached to anything. So I think it's cool that what you're saying is that some of that fear that maybe gets in leaders' minds that says, hey, we can't do this new thing, we can't invest in this new technology because someone's not going to come along. Sounds like when the rubber meets the road, what you guys have seen at Stanley is people do come along in by the huge percentage margins.
Exactly.
And the value to the business is there.
And we're a growing business. So because we're growing, we're continuing to build out our operations and manufacturing footprint. So we're adding more jobs as we're doing that, but we're not adding as much as we would have because the way we're manufacturing is much different now.
Right.
And so if you were in a situation where maybe you were a shrinking business and you were trying to put this technology in and trying to retrain people, you could probably do it, but it would be more complicated. Because we're a growing business, we can take the 10 or 20% folks that maybe are not as interested in the more sophisticated opportunities, that they just want to do more manual labor. There's still some opportunities because there's still processes that have to be manual.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, maybe there will be a plant in the future where it's a complete lights out plant. You don't need people in it. That's a great vision to have. I'm just not sure how realistic that is.
Yeah, it would not anytime in the next couple of years.
Right.
I wouldn't think.
Right.
So I know we're sort of have a limited time, so I'll just kind of move on to a couple other quick things, which is what is sort of the future path for Stanley, both in terms of the technology investment and where you see the business kind of growing into?
Yeah, I think we're at another kind of interesting crossroads for our company because of what I described earlier. Our company is just really so heavily weighted to tools and outdoor products, and then we have these two other smaller businesses. So, we've said this publicly. That'll be something we'll continue to evaluate, whether those two businesses belong in the portfolio or not over time. We'll see. But you can see what's evolving is that tools and outdoor continues to be the major business of Stanley Black & Decker. And tools has a lot of runway still in front of it. I mean, we look at the tools business and say, okay, as much as Craftsman's been a success, there's a wonderful opportunity that we still haven't gotten to yet. We rolled out 120 initial products under the Craftsman brand.
Mm-hmm.
The plan is to have over 400 to 500 products
No kidding.
eventually. So we have a lot more new products we need to roll out under that brand, which will serve the U.S. market. The other thing is the Black & Decker brand. It's become a little stale. I mean, it's an opportunity to really refresh that brand and create something special. I mean, I think most people would be surprised to hear this, but the Black & Decker brand is only about $1 billion in revenue for us. Most people would probably say, really? Are you kidding me?
Yeah,
it's not as big as most people think. We licensed the Black & Decker brand to small appliance manufacturers. So you might see a small appliance out there with a Black & Decker brand. That's a totally different revenue stream for another company.
Okay.
But if you just think about the tools and the outdoor products, it's $1 billion. And I look at that and I say, well, why can't that be like $10 billion? Why can't it be 10 times the size it is today if you refresh the brand?
Is there a big enough market in that residential kind
Absolutely.
of light DIY?
Absolutely.
There is.
And there's also a market internationally for it because it serves not only the DIY internationally, but it also serves the tradesman category in certain countries.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that opportunity makes that very big as well. Then you look at the DeWALT brand and the Stanley brands, great opportunities for more future growth globally is in addition to the other two brands. So you look at it and say, okay, we're a $14 billion business in tools and outdoor today. You take $1 billion of that, put it with the outdoor business acquisitions we're doing. That's going to be $4 billion in revenue for outdoor next year. Tools will be probably 14 or 15 in revenue. And I could see a runway where the tools business on its own without outdoor could get to something over $20 billion in size from a revenue point of view because of those growth opportunities. And then, of course, there's other acquisitions that we could do that are probably more outside the U.S. because we do have such a significant presence in the U.S. with the brands that I mentioned and the acquisitions we've done. And then the outdoor business is a fantastic opportunity. And what I mean by outdoor is really two categories. It's the gasoline-driven lawnmowers. And then there's the handheld battery-operated products like weed whackers, trimmers, blowers that are under various brands that we've mentioned. The acquisitions we've done is in these lawnmowers. And so one of the strategic objectives is how do we electrify that space?
Get away from gas.
Get away from gas. Because we're a great manufacturer. We talked about that being one of our strong attributes. We have great brands. We have a great track record of electrifying all kinds of other products.
Sure.
Where we've gone from corded to battery-operated products. Applying that battery technology to a walk-behind mower, a riding mower, eventually a large landscape mower platform. I've seen those zero-turn mowers where somebody can turn on a dime.
100%, yeah.
We have solutions that are not far away from being in the market that you can make all those products battery-operated. And the environmental aspect of that is incredibly powerful.
Probably quieter, too.
It's a lot quieter.
Which should be nice for the people that have to ride them or push them or whatever.
Exactly. And, maybe they don't need to wear the big earmuffs and stuff like that. So that's a great growth opportunity going forward for that business. So we're just, we're sitting here today after 20 plus years, almost 22 years in a transformation of the company. And what's exciting to me is all the opportunity that's still ahead of us.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I have one sort of final question before we go to rapid fire. But before I ask it, I guess I have two final questions. I meant to ask earlier is, a lot of people that listen to this podcast are much smaller businesses than Stanley Black & Decker, as most businesses are. And I don't know if you have any insights. If you were a smaller manufacturer, it might be 25, 50 people, it might be a few hundred people. And you're saying, wow, this sounds really cool what Don's talking about. We'd like to get more lights out operation. We want to find out how can we do an Industry 4.0. We certainly can't afford a $20 or $30 million team. Do you have any insights? And I don't know if you would, but where would they start? How could someone take what you've done who might be inspired by it and be able to make it their own?
Well, one of the best things they could do is if they knock on our door and go visit our manufactory, they could see a lot of the things that they could be capable of doing. The other thing that we can do is I didn't really touch on this, but we've developed this large ecosystem of partners for Industry 4.0 that have all kinds of different technologies, and they work with large manufacturers, mid-sized manufacturers, and even small manufacturers. You know, one of the things that we've talked about as a strategic kind of outflow of Industry 4.0 is how could we help small, mid-sized manufacturers? Could we actually provide a solution that they could utilize in their environment? It's not the highest priority for us right now, but it's something that Sudi has actually put some energy into. But I would encourage them to really reach out to anybody you know in this space. You can certainly reach out to Stanley Black & Decker. We can give you insights on how you might do it, what might be a good partner for you to think through, because there are a lot of small solutions that aren't going to cost $1 million.
Right.
That might only cost $2,000, but that may actually create $10,000 of value for that manufacturer on an annual basis. And that scale of 2,000 investment and 10,000 in savings each year is not much different than my 20 million, 100 million.
Right, exactly. Right. They're just zeros at the end of the day, Don.
Just, you know,
right. Decimal places.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you have to be curious. You have to really reach out to people that are already doing it, and you have to be persistent. And it won't be easy because there's not a lot of solution for small manufacturers right now. But there's no doubt in my mind that that's coming.
Yeah.
It's just a question of time.
Just like the computer, right? There used to be a time where you had to have a whole room dedicated to a computer. Now, you know, got an iPhone in your pocket. So before rapid fire round of questions, one thing I want to make sure we cover is, I know Stanley's taken such a big leadership role in a number of different ways with Marty and other people kind of really involved, engaged in Connecticut and in the Hartford area. This big push kind of in Parkville, in Hartford, to kind of get some stuff going on there. I guess generally just want to hear maybe your thoughts why this is important to Stanley to dedicate resources to this, which is a very indirect value add, I would imagine. Certainly long-term thinking, which you guys seem to be pretty darn good at. But I wonder if you can maybe speak to why it's important, why Stanley's putting their name and top people, yourself, Jim, you know, and others behind it. Just talk to that maybe.
Yeah, part of it's probably the passion some of us have for this area. And, you know, you heard a little bit about my background, and I've been a Connecticut person my whole life. You know, Jim Lurie moved here 22 years ago, and for the most part, you know, I kind of look at him as a guy that's been in Connecticut his whole life, because that's how he operates and acts. So we both have a significant amount of passion to help Hartford and help Connecticut be successful. And I believe, and I know Jim feels the same way, is that communities can't be successful without a lot of intervention from the companies that work in those communities and the individuals that work in those communities. And when we look at what we're good at and what our strengths are, one of them is manufacturing. And in the history of Hartford and the history of Connecticut, if you go back and look at it, it has actually had a lot of manufacturing in its history, and it's been a hub of manufacturing in the United States for a long period of time. It might have lost its way in different periods, but if you go back, you know, Stanley started in New Britain in 1843 and has been manufacturing in New Britain since then. There's a lot of companies that have built manufacturing roots in Connecticut and around the Hartford area. And all the small and mid-sized manufacturers that you were talking about, they serve all these bigger companies. They provide parts, components, whatever the case may be. And so there's a long legacy that I think we need to continue to take advantage of. And this area attracts a lot of smart people. So you have talent in this space to do that. And so why not make this an innovation hub for manufacturing? And that's why we did our manufacturing in Hartford. Like, we want to create the first innovation hub in manufacturing in Hartford. And we now have company HCL, which is a IT outsourcing company that does a lot of different things, that they're actually bringing their manufacturing expertise in this space as well to their office here in Hartford that they just opened up like 2 or 3 weeks ago. The Parkville thing is incredibly exciting, what's going on there, and the amount of investment that likely will come from the state and some major corporations to really re-energize innovation in that particular area. all those things are the reason. I mean, you're right. It's not some people might be listening to me saying, well, you're the CFO. What's the payback? The payback is not something I can put a number on.
Right.
The payback is the intangible positive impact it's going to have on the community that we all live in.
That's great. There's no McKinsey report behind this one.
No, there's no report on that one.
With eye-popping numbers.
No.
And it's just a belief. I just think it's great. So many people see small businesses that, do stuff, right? Sit on boards of hospitals and do different things. Yeah. And it's just great to see large businesses, which I think have unfairly a lot of times in sort of the zeitgeist in the recent decades are sort of looked at as these soulless monstrosities. It's just so nice to see a big company, getting out there publicly and showing the importance of the private sector engaging.
Yeah, thank you. And the other thing is I don't think governments can solve this on their own.
No.
So governments and corporations and individuals have to work together to solve for this. If we just wait for our government to solve these things, it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. I could not agree with you more. Well, listen, Don, it's been awesome having you on. I'm going to switch to a rapid fire round of questions to end us out. You ready?
Okay, yeah.
All right. Red Sox or Yankees?
Absolutely Red Sox.
There we go. Starbucks or Dunkin'?
Oh, Starbucks, please.
Staycation or exotic destination?
I am a little of both.
A little of both.
I like the occasional exotic vacation, but I really do enjoy the occasional stay vacation where you just
chill,
enjoy your house and chill.
I like that. iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Sports car or SUV?
I have one of each.
A little bit of this, a little bit of that. One scoop of chocolate, one scoop of vanilla. Yeah. Do you have a favorite business book?
I do not. I've been asked that question so many times, and there's no one book that really stands out. If you go into my office at Stanley, I have probably 65 books in my bookcase that are business books. And the ones that I tend to gravitate towards have to do with leadership. Mm-hmm. And so the topic of leadership is something that I really believe passionately in, is that we always need to be kind of refreshing ourselves, re-educating ourselves. And so there's no one book. But I would say if you see a leadership topic book in the world of business, grab it.
So I don't usually do this on the rapid fire, but I'm going to do a quick follow-up, which is, do you have like a leadership lesson or something that you think about, like a mantra to think about, when you're in those challenging times and you got to reset, you don't want to react, but you want to engage, or just a leadership lesson you want to share?
Yeah, there's really two things that I believe strongly in. One is that never overreact to a crisis. Look at the crisis, figure out what you need to do, be thoughtful, bring in people to help you make the right decision. You don't need to make all the decisions on your own, and move forward. And you're gonna make mistakes, and then you got to pivot and change. The other thing that I really believe strongly in, from a leadership point of view, is that I think people need to put themselves in uncomfortable positions in the business community. And what I mean by that is take on a challenge. So you have worked for 10 years, and you may be a manager or director in some company, and you have an important role. Somebody says to you, hey, I think you could do this job in Brazil if you go there for 2 months, and I know it's a challenging job, I know it's a challenging opportunity. What do you think? Some people might say no, not interested. The person that says, yeah, I want to do that, and they know that probably they don't have all the answers, it's going to be uncomfortable, and they're going to need help, you will learn so much more in those 2 months than you would do in your job for those 2 months. So put yourself in those uncomfortable positions, and because ultimately that's how you're going to learn faster.
Gotta get out of your comfort zone to learn and grow.
Yeah.
If you could do anything in the entire world, and it had to be something other than be president and CFO of Stanley Black & Decker, what would you do?
I would have been a surgeon. It was actually something I thought about.
Really?
Going into college, that about actually becoming a doctor and being a surgeon, because I just love, most of what I read outside of business is books have a medical orientation to
really?
It, around the human body and how the body works, and surgery and things like that. It's always been a fascination of mine.
Well, there you go. Might be a tough one to do a surgeon as a second act, but
probably can't do that now. No.
But I like it. What's one thing, Don, that you learned early in your life or early in your career that you think's helped propel you to all the success that you've had?
Hard work. I mean, I've always been somebody that really believes in hard work. And I'm not talking about working from 6 in the morning till midnight. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just saying when you're engaged in those 8 or 10 hours a day, you are engaged. And you put your whole self into it and your passion into it. And you have to ultimately continue to pivot to what you really have a passion for. I started working in the tobacco fields in Windsor when I was 13. And it was not a great experience of sitting in the dirt, picking leaves off tobacco plants and hanging them in sheds. But you know what? It really taught me the lesson of the benefit of hard work, because you learn something. You also learn you don't want to do that for the rest of your life. You want to do something different. And all those opportunities really help you figure out who you're going to be in the future, as long as you stay focused on working hard.
Working hard. And finally, what's something that you learned later in your career or later in your life that if you could go back and tell young Don, and if he'd listened to you, you think it'd make a real positive impact?
I would have invested more time with my family 25 years ago. I think, that I'm very good with work-life balance today. But if you looked at me 25 years ago, I was too slanted to work. And so you can see the contradiction there of the hard work and the work-life balance. But if I could go back in time, I would have shifted that a little bit.
You think you would have ended up in the same place?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
A little bit of shift. So it wasn't the investment,
Well, it wasn't
unneeded time.
It wasn't a radical shift. It was just a little bit of a shift.
Oh, it's a really good lesson.
Because at the time, everything seems so critical. But then when you look back and you say, well, maybe it wasn't as important as it seemed at the time.
Connects back to don't overreact to a crisis,
Yes,
I suppose,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Don, it has been awesome having you on. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule.
Thank you, Ari. It's great to be here.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by CompassMSP.
Thanks for listening and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a strong manufacturing community, and it would be impossible to do without all of you.